Hey everybody, welcome to episode 59 of the Metal Detecting Show podcast. My name is Kieran and I have been metal detecting now for nearly 30 years. This week I want to discuss iron bias, or more specifically, the iron bias features of the Minelab Equinox and Vanquish series of detectors. So let's get on with the show. Hey everyone, before we start I want to thank you for listening to the podcast and I hope you enjoyed the episode this week. If you want to support the show, there are many options available from the links in the episode show notes below. And if you want to interact with me and the show, that information's in there too. But most importantly, if you like this content, please don't hesitate to tell your friends and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Before we start into the main topic, I want to go and give a few updates in my adventures in metal detecting. I'm still hitting Timble Beach with my own style of mudlarking and metal detecting with varying success, but I know there's some great finds in there, so I'll keep plugging away. I wanted to purchase the Coil Tech 6-inch coil for the Equinox to help here, but they're like hen's teeth at the minute and can't be found anywhere. I think Coil Tech really underestimated demand for this coil and possibly overestimated the impact of COVID, unless they got stuck in the container ship in the Suez Canal. Either way, no one has them in stock, so I continue to sit and wait for it. I want to take a minute to shout out to all the detectorists who joined in solidarity of their love of the chopstick as an essential tool. It gave me some laugh out loud moments over the last few weeks, and it is safe to say, just by listening, you have all been indoctrined into the order of the single chopstick. Chopsticks ahoy! I also want to thank everyone for sending me ideas for coming episodes. This really takes the pressure off, so keep them coming, with some ideas including an Equinox V, the new Nocta multi-frequency machine in a battle royale of the multi-frequency machines, whenever that decides to come out, returning finds or finds retrieval, hats, mental health, and gaining permissions, and I'll commit to doing each and every one of these in the future, so thank you very much and keep them coming. Right. On to the main topic this week, and that's the iron bias feature of the Minelab Equinox series of detectors, and the Vanquish 540 for that matter. So, what is iron bias? Well, to put it simply, iron bias is a preference between ferrous and non-ferrous targets. A quick explanation of what ferrous means. Firstly, you hear a lot of people refer to ferrous as the presence of iron. That is correct, but chemically, ferrous is the presence of iron plus 2 ions, so it's in its oxidized state. Outside chemistry, ferrous means generally containing iron. The word is derived from the Latin word ferrum. Ferrous metals include steel and pig iron and alloys of iron with other metals. Non-ferrous is used to describe metals and alloys that do not contain a noticeable amount of iron. In metal detecting parlance, ferrous and non-ferrous objects are relatively easy to detect and ID and are generally considered at either end of the scale, while complex iron objects sit between these but are difficult to ID whether they are a good find or a trash find. However, detectorists also have a preference on what or how they like to hunt. For example, some detectorists like to get every good target out of the ground and will accept some ferrous targets to do this, while at the other end of the scale we have hunters who want zero trash and only good signals and will be okay with the thought of leaving some good finds behind in the ground. Iron bias on the Equinox allows you to specify what your preference is along its sliding scale of 0 to 9 on the Equinox 800 or 0 to 3 on the Equinox 600, or if you're on the Vanquish you can select between high, which is the default, or low if you want to ID coins amongst high trash sites. Point of note on the scale difference between the Equinox 600 and 800. Both start at 0, however 3 on the 800 doesn't equal 3 on the 600, it actually equals 9 on the 600, so the 800 scale is a multiple of 3 to the 600 scale. This means that the 800 has a more granular resolution of preference, but both go to the same start and end points. If you're familiar with a single frequency VLF machine, a low iron bias setting will feel natural to you, while if you're more familiar with an FBS or BBS machine, then a high iron bias will feel more natural to you. Let's get into discussing the actual settings of iron bias. If you're not familiar with it, you can select it by pressing down the settings key, moving the settings selection cursor to recovery speed, and then pressing the settings button for 2 seconds, which will bring you into the feature. Hitting the accept and reject button will toggle the iron bias settings between iron bias FE and F2. However, remember that each feature is mutually exclusive in that selecting one disables the other. So what are iron bias FE and iron bias F2? Well, starting with FE, which was the original iron bias settings, till the software update of 2.1, which was the birth of the F2 iron bias feature, which was pitched as the bottle top setting. Anyways, back to iron bias FE. This is a preference setting that provides some control over the target ID response of the detector. In other words, it puts the signal received from a complex iron signal in a category that matches your preference. Remember, a detector will struggle with categorizing a complex iron signal which sits between easily identifiable non-ferrous and ferrous signals. So with iron bias FE, if you want a complex target identified as natural as possible, then setting the iron bias FE preference low will give you this, and the signal will be identified as non-ferrous, resulting in a higher likelihood you will dig it. However, if you want your complex ferrous target identified as iron, increasing the iron bias FE setting will increase the likelihood of this, but decrease the likelihood you will dig it. Of course, this is the opposite if you're looking for iron finds or relics and want to dig them. Putting it simply, if you want your detector to emphasize a complex target with a high tone and a high target ID, set your iron bias FE settings lower. If you want the opposite, i.e. you want to emphasize a complex target with a low tone and target ID, set your iron bias high. Taking this on to another level, imagine you have a non-ferrous target positioned close by a ferrous target, resulting in an iffy signal. We have all had them. Adjusting the iron bias low will emphasize the non-ferrous target, giving you a target ID and tone that you will most likely dig, while adjusting the iron bias FE to high will emphasize the iron target, giving you a target ID and tone that you probably won't dig. This is also true for large iron targets that can give a high tone, or any iron target that gives a falsing in a high tone. Ultimately, it's a trade-off between where you sit on the scale of, do you want to get every good target while digging some iron signals, or do you only want to dig good targets and not have iffy signals to contend with, but happy that you are leaving some great targets behind. That's why I call it a preference setting. It's all down to your personal preference. My own preference is that I have it as low as 3 because I'm happy to dig holes knowing that I'm not leaving stuff behind. Looking at iron bias setting F2, like I said previously, came with the software update 2.1 and was pitched as the bottle top bias setting, essentially marketed as being able to better identify crown cap bottle tops. F2 effectively increases the range of the iron bias. The iron bias F2 setting provides a better iron bias and discrimination to tricky ferrous targets like crown cap bottle tops that iron bias FE is less effective for. It is an advanced feature that is not for the faint of heart, as if you lower the F2 setting, the iron rejection will be less effective, while the iron bias FE settings lessens also. But used in the right hands, it can be an effective tool to notch out bottle caps. So, in this case, the marketing blurb seems to be correct. The recommendation is to set iron bias F2 at 6 on a beach and 5-ish on land, but like iron bias, it's all down to your personal preference and your ability to hear, in inverted commas, iron in the first place. If you're experienced at hearing iron, then you may want to lower your iron bias F2 setting right down so you can get all the target information in its unnatural form. And not to forget the Vanquish 540, this also has the iron bias feature, although it only exists in a high-low format, but this logic rings true here also. As the default is set at high, this will mean that complex targets and large iron will default to an iron target ID and tone. If you want a more natural response on the 540, set it on low, especially if you're happy to dig a few more holes to get everything. Iron bias is always on. It's a great feature to adjust on high iron infested sites such as a beach or maybe an old farm site where you want to mask out the iron. Other than that, defaults should be good enough, unless you're getting very specific on what you're looking for and what your preference is. And lastly, remember, and I see this mistake all over the internet, even on some YouTube videos demoing the feature, if you're selecting Iron Bias FE, Iron Bias F2 will be off. And if you're using the F2 setting, FE will be off. They are not on at the same time. There can only be one. There can be only one at a time. That's it for this week. I hope you liked the episode this week of the Metal Detecting Show podcast. Check out our website, www.themetaldetectingshow.com, for this episode's show notes. Check out our Patreon page if you want to help the podcast stay alive or just want to buy me a coffee. If you want to buy me a coffee, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/metal detecting. Also, if you'd like to leave me a voicemail, please do so on speakpipe.com/the Metal Detecting Show. The link is in the show notes. If you feel like taking your appreciation to the next level, feel free to leave me a positive review on any podcast directory of your choice. If you like this content and would like more, please don't hesitate to tell your friends, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Once again, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we will chat to you all again next week. Get out there, eyes down, and happy hunting.